How did the ancient fur trade change the world, you ask? Well, you came to the right place. Welcome to Archaeology Insights, where we examine the historical evidence to discover and understand the connections. The fur trade was one of the earliest and most transformative forms of global commerce, shaping cultural, economic, and political landscapes across continents. From ancient times to the early modern era, fur trading evolved from localized exchange networks into a structured global industry, linking indigenous societies, European empires, and emerging market economies. What began as a regional practice embedded in ritual and status soon became a driving force of expansion, colonization, and economic integration, setting the stage for the far-reaching consequences of European imperialism. Let's dive into the fur trade and see how it helped shape the world we live in. Long before European contact, indigenous peoples in North America engaged in extensive trade networks where furs played a crucial role. Archaeological evidence reveals that cultures such as the Hopewell and Mississippians exchanged goods across vast distances, with copper, obsidian, and other materials moving alongside high-value furs. These early networks were not solely economic but deeply cultural, with furs carrying both symbolic and practical significance. Across the Atlantic, a similar dynamic played out in Eurasia, where the Scythians, Mongols, and Norse expanded fur trade routes through Siberia, the Black Sea, and the Silk Road. Roman and Chinese records document the movement of luxury furs into elite markets, reinforcing the idea that fur was not merely a necessity for survival, but a marker of power and prestige. As trade routes expanded during the medieval period, fur transitioned from a regionally significant good into a commodity of growing global demand. The Russian expansion into Siberia exemplified this transformation, as fur became one of the primary drivers of economic and territorial conquest. Novgorod traders ventured deep into the northern wilderness in search of sable and mink, and by the 14th century, Russian Orthodox monasteries and princely estates had amassed vast wealth from the fur trade. The Mongol Empire, which controlled many of these trade routes, taxed fur shipments that passed through its territories, integrating Siberian pelts into broader Eurasian markets. Simultaneously, the demand for fur surged in both Europe and the Islamic world. Venetian merchants imported furs via the Silk Road, supplying aristocratic and ecclesiastical consumers, while Islamic traders brought high-quality pelts into Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. The presence of fur-lined garments in medieval shipwrecks and burials underscores the widespread use of furs as status symbols in both Christian and Muslim societies. Despite the increasing commercialization of fur, indigenous communities continued to play an active role in shaping trade. In North America, the Great Lakes and Mississippi cultures sustained robust fur exchanges long before European settlement. Even in regions touched by early European exploration, such as Newfoundland, Norse artifacts found at Lonsau Meadows suggest that Viking traders may have engaged in limited fur exchanges with indigenous groups. Along the Pacific coast and in Alaska, indigenous peoples such as the Tlingit and Aleut had well-established fur economies long before Russian contact. The archaeological record indicates that sea otter pelts were already a valuable trade commodity in these societies, suggesting that indigenous groups maintained sophisticated trading networks independent of European influence. By the end of the medieval period, the fur trade had become an integral part of the global economy, setting the stage for later European expansion and colonization. The increasing demand for furs fueled territorial conquests, as Russian traders moved deeper into Siberia and European explorers sought to establish new trade routes in North America. Where early fur trade networks had been shaped by indigenous autonomy and localized exchanges, by 1500, European and Russian merchants had begun to dominate markets, often through coercion and violence. The transition from symbolic and ritualistic use of furs to their mass commercialization marked a turning point in world history. No longer merely a luxury item for elites, fur had become a global commodity, one that would drive exploration, settlement, and ultimately, the subjugation of indigenous lands and peoples. The fur trade's evolution from prehistory through the medieval era is a story of human ambition, ingenuity, and consequence. What began as a regional exchange among indigenous peoples, Vikings, and Siberian traders soon expanded into a global industry that linked cultures, fueled economies, and shaped the course of history. From the Arctic tundra to the courts of China, from the rivers of Siberia to the bustling markets of Baghdad and Venice, furs traveled astonishing distances, treasured for their warmth, beauty, and symbolic power. They draped rulers and religious leaders, adorned warriors and aristocrats, and conveyed status in ways that transcended borders. In many ways, the fur trade was a testament to the human ability to adapt, to create networks of exchange, and to seek beauty and prestige even in the harshest of environments. Yet woven into this story of trade and connection is a far more complicated reality. While fur brought wealth to many, it also laid the groundwork for exploitation, conquest, and displacement. Russian traders moving into Siberia sought not just profit but control, bringing indigenous communities into the trade by force, forever altering their way of life. In Europe and the Islamic world, the luxurious pelts that lined the garments of the elite were trapped and processed by those who often saw little benefit from the trade itself. Even before European colonization of the Americas, the fur trade had begun to shift from a system of mutual exchange to one of growing inequality, where the quest for resources increasingly came at the expense of those who lived closest to them. Understanding the fur trade means recognizing these multiple perspectives at once. It was a driver of exploration and a tool of empire. It was an engine of wealth and a cause of suffering. It connected distant societies and disrupted local ones. The fur trade reminds us that history is rarely simple, that even something as seemingly straightforward as a beaver pelt or a sable cloak carries within it stories of triumph and tragedy, resilience and loss. And just as furs once traveled across vast landscapes, so too does their legacy, shaping our understanding of commerce, colonialism, and the delicate balance between human desire and the natural world.